you know, for old people, they have an exhibit down at the Whitney.
So why were you there?
I was there. From 10 to 3, they give you a cook, I've been cookied up today. Give you cookies and coffee and stuff. Then they take you down, they got some cool exhibits there. Whitney today.
What was the exhibit?
It
Yeah.
was the biennial now. I don't know, that twice a year or every 2 years, one of those.
Yeah.
And it was great.
Yeah.
Not only did they have the regular
Hi,
stuff,
Isabel. Hi.
but they also had the,
Hi, how are you?
new thing.
Good.
So,
I'm John.
Time for it?
go in there.
We don't, I mean, we can do this by letter because it's notification, it's not a resume, but,
Really cool stuff. You see that one? It's
you can also get.
It's hanging
Sign
from
off
the
on
ceiling.
it,
Had they put that up, it's got 30 different panels and the name exact plane,
I mean, that's
but
what
each one had to be
I'm
on. In the right.
I'll wait for a few minutes, but I don't want to hold everybody up. We have
And it's
a
not
comment
even
on from.
Plane,
Citizen
it's
Budget
like
Committee
a
at
high
100%.
That's amazing.
Fantastic stuff then.
Is all this stuff still up?
Yeah.
It wasn't just special, like, whatever?
It was for biennial.
Yeah.
Okay, for the biennial.
Great. I had it this
Yes,
weekend.
it's cool.
Awesome.
And
So-
this one is made out of amber and it's in a cage because it's falling down, it's disintegrating. You see, it started off as a rectangle, a solid
Yeah.
rectangle. But it's
No.
caving in, and they knew it would, so they dumped it in a cage, and the back of it, I don't know if you could tell, it's leaning against the back, and if you look through, it's cracked,
Yeah.
hollow inside, and all the
Still,
pieces are
See
falling.
it.
Quorum is 11 and we're at
That's
8.
amazing.
Amazing.
You know what, I'm actually gonna kick it off. We're a little short, but welcome to the Budget, Education and City Services Committee of CB5, which is BEX for short. My name is Renee Kinsella, I'm the chair. Julie Chu, who's running a little bit late, she's the vice chair, she's gonna be here in a minute. We're happy to see everybody here this evening. Thank you for coming in person, very much appreciate it. Before we begin, I'd just like to give a brief overview of how the committee works. Each presenter is gonna have the opportunity to speak to the committee, and once their presentation is concluded, the committee is going to have the opportunity to ask questions. And when all of the committee's questions have been answered, members of the public are going to have an opportunity to ask questions. And then once everyone's questions have been addressed, the committee is going to go into what's known as business session. And that's when members of the BEX committee, or if any other members of the board are here, they'll have a chance to discuss the issue amongst themselves and come to some sort of decision about what action to take. And once there's a motion, if there in fact is a motion for a vote, only members of the BEX committee will be permitted to vote on that motion. I'd like to stress here at BEX, everyone's view is very much respected, and I would encourage every single member here to share their views. We all join the board in order to contribute to the betterment of our neighborhood. And the best way for each of us to do that is to fully participate in our conversations. We're all different, you know, we're all gonna have different perspectives, and that's super okay. The BEX committee is a little bit different than some of the other committees we have on CB5 in that we don't usually have applications come to us. So our determinations are not as straightforward as, say, landmarks. We may decide to draft a resolution or a letter, or we may decide to use those presentations as the first step in gathering information as we inform ourselves or the community for actions in the future. For instance, we'll probably do that with this CBC's presentation tonight. We'll use that information going forward as we think about the budget. When the committee does have an action before it, the issue is voted upon by the present members of the BEX committee. And then if we pass that resolution, it's presented to the full CB5 board for a vote. And the vote of the CB5 board is the final position of the board, which in this instance, the vote will be on April 11th. We have 2 items tonight. The first is the ownership transfer of Second Wind, which provides outpatient therapy. And we're also going to hear from the Citizens Budget Committee, which is going to provide some insight into fiscal year 25 budget, as well as information on a recent resident survey. John Bliss is the current owner, of Second Wind, and Yahunda Stern, did I say that correctly? Yahuda, I knew I would get it wrong, I'm so sorry. But I just got it wrong. Well, we very much appreciate that they are here in person to speak with us. The reason that they are here is the New York State Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services, which is known as OSHA. They require that the community be notified when a transfer of an OSHA facility takes place. This issue was assigned to Zona, who did an amazing job of providing background materials to everyone. I'm gonna let Zona say a few words of what she learned, and then we're gonna hand it over to Mr. Bliss and Mr. Stern for a few words and questions.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks again, John and Yehuda, for being here in person with us. As Renee mentioned, Second Wind is an outpatient therapy provider based in Flatiron. They're on Broadway between 21st and 22nd Street. So to give a little bit overview of the facility, the treatment that's provided there is talk therapy. So think about if you are someone who's going through behavioral health issues, you might talk to a counselor. That's the type of care that's provided here as well. So following the transaction, there's no intended changes to operations planned at all. Additionally, John is also staying on as clinical director for a period of 2 years, just to ensure a smoother transition and other benefits. So the new owner, Yehuda, who we have a copy of his resume, is himself a certified alcohol and substance abuse counselor trainee, and will be receiving his master's of social work as well later this year. So in terms of the clinic staff, there are around 14 of them. They're all W-2 employees, they're not contractors. And last year, the clinic saw around 175 patients. So the average length of a patient's relationship was around 18 months. And something that's of note is the clinic does serve a meaningful amount of patients who are on Medicaid and Medicare. 36% were on Medicaid or Medicaid managed care plans, and 9% were on Medicare or Medicare Advantage plans. And there were an additional 6% that were cash pay or out of pocket. I think once again, just based on the information that we received, it sounds like following this transaction, it will generally be like operations as prior with not a ton of no changes intended. So that'll just pause there.
Great. So, I know that that's a lot, and I would welcome the both of you to jump in and give us any information that you would like to add.
Yeah, I guess, well, my story is Yidi and I met about a year ago, and I wasn't sure what I was doing. I had a partner for a number of years, and then she retired about 6 years ago. And I turned 70 this year, and it occurred to me that I'm not going to be around forever. And I had to come up with some plan for the place, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. But the people, the core people there really wanted to keep it going, but they didn't really want to run it. You know, they didn't want to do all that. And then it was really a coincidence that we met, and then
It wasn't a coincidence, it happened from the one above.
okay.
someplace.
And we met a number of times, you know, and I was really ambivalent about the whole thing, like, but I think it's really the proper thing for me to do. It's like having a will or something for me, because if something happens to me, which it will at some point, and I don't know when exactly, but at least this way they can keep going, you know, and I feel confident that the character of the place will maintain, you know, and hopefully that's our intention at this point. So it's really a proper time for me, and I want to work less, you know, I don't want to be there, you know, 50 hours a week, you know, so much like, so, that's kind of it,
That's kind of
really,
it,
you know, and,
I guess I can say my side of the story.
yeah, I mean, well, I know for me, it's just, I don't know, it's just been the perfect profession for me, you know, it's just, I really still enjoy going there every day and still learning, you know, so, but I think this is the time in my life that I have to like kind of think about, you know, okay, what happens like, you know, next for me, so. Basically, and yet he says if it works out and I do my job, he'll let me stay, you know, so. But
He may not want to retire anymore. So, thank you so much, John. I appreciate it. Thank you, Zona, for giving. Basically, Zona's just summed it all up. It's awesome. So, first of all, I want to thank the one above for giving me the opportunity to be here presenting in front of such an amazing board. Being involved in a board is something that probably most people don't understand, but some of it's on the board. Is very, very dedicated to community's needs, and I appreciate it. And that's the reason I came by in person. Zona said, oh, you can join on Zoom. I said, listen, people that dedicate so much time, they're coming in and they're hustling this. This is not one meeting, they have many meetings, and I'm just gonna check in and out on Zoom. I'm making the trip down to the city, coming by just to show a face and say thank you in person. So thank God I'm involved in this industry for the last 6 years. I run a couple of these type of clinics in upstate New York. We actually currently, on a corporate level, I oversee 5 of these clinics. So I've learned the managerial skills of the business. I got inspired being involved in this business and actually being involved, unfortunately, with a few cases within the mental health and substance abuse industry to actually go and become a counselor myself. Like Zona mentioned, I'm a KSAC-T right now, and thank God next month I'm graduating LIU College where I'm going to become an MSW. So mazel tov for that. And I'm happy to continue John's legacy. John is involved in this industry for the last 30 years, providing talk therapy, and have a whole staff of 14 people providing talk therapy for the people in this community, which is unbelievable. Like we just heard, 175 patients or clients, however you want to call them, in the community are being serviced by the clinic. Being that mental health and substance abuse is on the rise, and I don't know if any of you know, but if you call traditional clinics, the wait time sometimes is 30, 60 days. 30, 60 days to get enrolled in treatment, unfortunately, in a serious situation can lead to, to an overdose or anything like that. So it's very, very important to get proper care out there in the community, and that's what inspires me to be here. And hopefully God willing, I'll be able to continue this legacy and be able to provide continuous help to the people in the community.
That is fantastic.
That was without papers.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna open it up to questions. Who has any questions? Any questions for our presenters?
How do you measure success?
That's actually, I appreciate that question. Do you want to answer? Do you want I should answer?
Well,
Is that a question for me or the question is for John?
I guess for you.
Mark Twain said you have lies, damn lies, and then statistics, But generally, how success is measured is really if somebody enters treatment again, or the criminal justice system, or, gets a DWI, or gets arrested for some reason, so that's how they get tracked. But OASIS keeps, which is the state agency that, and we're about 45% by success. So what that would mean is that they don't have to enter some kind of treatment or don't get in trouble, basically, again. I think that's probably kind of high because a lot of times people come in once or twice, and you don't see them again, sometimes never, but I really just look at it that, there's a personal, subjective success that they want to achieve, which I think is really important. I think it's really, love and work, if you will, that stable family, stable place to live, or stable, connections to people, and then some type of daily activity that they're involved in, ideally, I think a lot of people end up working, which is kind of a way a lot of us achieve our, dreams or whatever goals, but that's how I measure it, that, and they're actively pursuing those things, basically, but I'm not sure if that answers it, but yeah. So it generally, the people that hang in there, they get better. Yeah, it's it's like anything else, really. You want to play the piano, if you keep practicing, you will get better, if you quit practicing, you won't, it's kind of like that, so, but most of our people come in because there's some acute thing that has happened. They've gotten in trouble, they lost their job or something. And then it's really about, I guess it's all relapse prevention, everything, from day one, really. That's what recovery to me is growing. That's how I would describe it. And if they engage in that, relationship, and that kind of meaningful conversation with somebody and then do their work outside, that's really what we look for, is that, yeah, so, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I want to add on that. First of all, 45% is actually a very, very big number in the drug and alcohol industry, and percentage-wise, if you Google it, so that's a very, very big number. But I agree to everything that John said. In addition to that, the way I actually look at success is if when the person came in, he was in one stage, and the person's leaving treatment, he's in a much better stage right there, proof is in the pudding. So that's why I stand for, and that's our goal here.
Charles, I see you have a question.
Yes, hi, Charles Nye here. I would like to know, out of all the patients who are Medicaid, I was just wondering, can you comment on how many have adequate housing, and what their housing needs are, and how many are homeless? And in this area, as we know, there's a lot of luxury apartments and rent stabilized apartments and things like that. You know, sometimes these apartments are out of reach for people who might be on welfare, such as Medicaid and SSI and things like that. So do you think do you think adequate housing helps in helping people who are going through these mental health issues, who are on welfare, to help them not relapse? And how important is adequate housing to people's recovery and relapse prevention? Thank you.
To me, it's the single biggest obstacle we have, like, just generally. I mean, I think we're fortunate that percentage-wise, most of the people that we treat have stable housing, you know, but there's definitely people that don't have it, and it's a very kind of cumbersome system, you know, to get them okayed, and to, you know, it takes like sometimes a year or two, you know, to get somebody in the I forget what it's called, like, but the Office of the Homeless, you know, to get them like registered as a client potentially there, and then to finally get housing. But it does happen, but, you know, they have to hang in there. But when I mentioned like social stability, that's one of the biggest things, is where do you go every night? Like, you know, do you have a place to live, you know, a home, you know? So, you know, I would say that, and then, you know, something to do all day, basically, you know, it's just, yeah, but that's what I think of when social stability. It's like, you know, where do you live? You know, where do you go to eat? You know, where do you, yeah. It's not, the majority of our patient population, though, so, but yeah,
Thank you.
but it's a big problem. You know, that, yeah.
Thank you for that. Additional questions, Mike?
So I don't think I understand why, if a spa was changing here, or a ping pong parlor was changing here, or retail was changing here, they wouldn't have to come before us. Why this kind of an operation has to come before the community board? What's the deal with it?
So it's required in the law, in New York State law.
Why?
Why? Because it's a substance, it's one of those things that is, I think that the New York State requires, this is an issue, you know, it's people who are getting treatment for drug addiction. And so they want to make sure that the neighborhood and the neighbors, and that there's notification. We are notified. We don't have a role per se, but it's notification. So it's letting us know that this is happening in the neighborhood. Why?
So maybe we could ask,
Yeah.
No, that's a really good question. I'm not sure about this meeting so much. We're here because Oasis told us we had to be here. The way they used to do it apparently was that we just had to notify the community
With a
board
letter.
and get a receipt,
Mhm.
like an email back that we told you. But when I did it the first time, you know, there was the Health Systems Agency, and I thought it was really interesting, actually, because they have all these formulas that are kind of amazing, like how many like overdoses at the local hospitals. They have estimates of how many people are using those drugs based on the number of overdoses. So they actually license the physical place, you know, so, you know, I was skeptical at first too, but when I was doing it all, I said, this is kind of amazing that they have all this information, but they want to justify, why are you near the Flatiron? Like, you know, all right, you're in Community Board 5. I can't remember the time, but you get pretty I think they're pretty close estimates, statistics again, but that, how many people are using drugs in the area? How many people are working in the area? And it was all these like formulas, like, and I felt like, well, this makes sense, actually. Like, why are we in this community board, as opposed to like, another one, And then they measure that against how many like treatment slots there are. And then they say, well, it's underserved based on this. So, you can open your place there. That's why we did it originally, but I don't think the Health Systems Agency even exists anymore. I think that was under Johnson or something, but.
I mean, I was looking up Oasis again because I wanted to understand why it wasn't just a letter. You're right. You used to just give, people would come, they could decide to come like you did, but normally it was just, they would come. Sometimes I would go to the location, but it was just a receipt.
Right.
I was looking at the genesis of the law when we were coming. It's just notification is required. I'm looking, I'm even looking now, and I'm not seeing as to why that's required. I think maybe just historically.
Well, I asked somebody from Oasis and they said, I'm not gonna mention the name, but they said, well, I think maybe Oasis is overreaching on the second time you have to go, but I was, well, do it, I'm not gonna.
I mean, it's a good thing to
I'm
give
not
those.
allowed to meet the community board.
Right.
They're the needs of the community, but I can't answer you why in Albany they're making a lot of these laws. We gotta play with the laws.
I mean, in the same way.
By the laws and,
Yeah,
we're
like.
here, we're doing what's supposed to be done.
The same rationale I would
Right.
imagine for liquor licenses. I mean,
Yeah.
why once upon a time they required that? I would imagine just to let the community
Yeah.
know and have notice and have input. I would imagine the similar rationale. I'm not seeing it in the history of the Oasis, but I would. I'm just surprised.
Yeah, I could say it. I don't know if they would say it like, but I remember a concern was that, because at the time, the community board was saturated with just, the homeless hotels and they weren't really well run, but they were very concerned that we weren't a methadone program. And so, I do recall that, I remember there was a couple of them, and you're not gonna do methadone. I said, no. Yeah.
I do have a question. Do you plan on adding additional services at all? Like, do you plan on extending or adding or?
Actually, we don't even have, the clinic is such a small, square footage. What is it? It's like 1,200.
1,200
Yeah, it's
square feet.
it's such a small place. Probably today, if the state would come in, they would want a bigger place, but because it's grandfathered in. So it's really, the clinic is maximized to what we can,
Yeah.
to do under these, circumstances. I want to, continue what John is doing and continue to provide the best treatment out there.
Brad?
Is there any intention to integrate it with any of your other clinics, or is this gonna run
No.
entirely standalone?
The other clinics, I don't know. I'm an employee.
Oh, I see,
Yeah.
okay.
So this is where I want to get my feet wet, actually do something myself. I'm running the other clinics for 6 years. So that's where I got my expertise, and then I went to school, like I said. I got a KSEC T license, and like I said, MSW next month, God willing. Pray for me.
Okay.
And we don't have the traffic we used to have. Just people coming in and out. Oasis has really embraced this virtual treatment. Like, they are proponents of it, I'm a little leery, but I'm going with it for sure, but so I think like it feels like, I'm there and some days like I feel like there's nobody there but me. I mean, there are other people, but it's much quieter than it ever was. And probably some weeks it's probably more than half are telehealth visits.
Halfway?
Telehealth, that they're on Zoom or, some platform like that, so.
Did I see somebody else with a question?
I have another one if everybody's gone already.
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
So you said you had 14 employees
14, yeah.
and in 1,200 square feet?
Yeah, but.
They don't all come at the same time.
Yeah, so,
It's a good question.
No, yeah.
Back to back.
Bunk, desks and therapist couches. But, they're mostly part-time, like the physician and the nurse practitioner there, probably a total of like 10 hours, 12 hours a week. And then, there are 1, 2, 3. The woman that runs the admin is working from her home in Long Island, so she has an assistant that comes in like at least one day a week, a couple of days a week. So the office space is, it's actually underutilized, like right now, because of the telehealth and people, they don't have to come in to do that. They can stay at home. I started working Monday and Fridays, in another location, so.
Okay, any further questions? Donna?
I was curious if you could talk about like where your patients are coming from, like are they getting referred by the state or the city, or if they're just kind of signing themselves?
It's not the city or the state. The city as an employer, we have this anger management program, like for some reason, I'm not drawing any inference from it, but there's a number of people that work for the city that like benefit from our services. They're probably the biggest referral source, but they're like an employee assistance program. Yeah. Now, most of the referrals actually, it's changed over, it's 35 years, but now it's mostly people check their insurance, like, because it's Medicaid managed care, right? I'm sure you're familiar with all this, right? But the Medicaid is just shifted. It's gone to Medicaid managed care. So it could be like United Healthcare or manages those that insurance or that aspect of insurance, the community plans, they often refer them to. So they'll either call the insurance or they'll go online and we'll see that we're providers for them because we're in network with, well, everyone that we can get in network with, we are. And right now, the only one for some reason, I don't know what happened, is we're straightening it out. I hope it was Blue Cross Blue Shield. But so it's mostly like really on either the internet or they call the insurance company, but everybody here is probably called an insurance company, like, right? So they usually get it from online, like, it might be on Psychology Today, they'll look and under our profile, have the insurances we take, yeah.
Thanks. Okay,
That's the bulk of it now, like the referrals.
Charles, any more questions?
Yeah,
Charles, do you have a final question?
Two quick ones. You said you take managed plans. Is that also what they call managed long-term care plans? And the other question was, it's really hard sometimes to get therapy or psychiatric help in Manhattan, especially. Do you think, unless you go to one of the main hospitals, sometimes people feel that it's, some people trying to start their own independent practices find they feel they don't get enough support from the state and they don't get reimbursed that well from Medicaid because a lot of, therapists, psychiatrists don't always take Medicaid. Do you think this is one of the problems of why there's not enough psychiatric and therapy services in Manhattan especially, or do you think there's any other reason?
I can answer that if John allows.
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, you nailed the problem. It's so true. What happens is in the industry, there are people that they go to school, they become social workers, they start off in a clinic, and then they learn the trade, and then they decide, why should I work in a clinic and make X amount of money? And they start, going for private pay. And private pay, people are paying out to $250 out of the pocket. But it's very unfortunate. People that can't afford $250 out of the pocket, where they're going? They're going to the clinics. The problem is the clinics can't afford to pay the social workers so much money when they're only billing the insurance companies $100, $125 for their services. So unfortunately, yeah, that is a very, very big problem out there. And that's the reason why so many people that need help out there are being delayed and have to wait weeks, if not months, in many communities to get the help. Because clinics are swamped with referrals and they can't afford a private practice. The only solution to this problem is that Medicaid should start reimbursing higher rates. And, ultimately people will probably be able to get better care. But yes, we definitely, you said it the way it is.
Thank you.
We can have some people here working in a lobbyist note, maybe we can get somewhere.
That's too bad.
Oh, dear.
It's unfortunate, yeah.
Okay. Any final questions? Okay. Anyone on the attendees? I just want to check any final questions. All right, we now have quorum, so we don't have to do a letter. We can move into business session. What this is noticing, as I said, OSHA requires noticing the transfer of the second wind facility. Do I have any comments, any thoughts about this?
The comment, this is
Mike?
terrific. This is terrific. With 45% success rate. Working in the Flatiron District and seeing what's going on the streets there and in the garment districts and all over Manhattan. I think it's a terrific thing that you guys are doing, and I wish Yehuda that you have much success.
Amen, thank you.
Anyone else?
Feel the same.
Okay.
Amen, thank you. I'll take every blessing.
So normally we've always done this as a letter, but we have quorum now. We can do it as a resolution and have it our full board if that's, normally a resolution, we send it to our electeds. I mean,
Okay,
I don't know if that's useful to you, or we can just notice it as a letter from our office here.
Yeah, I don't
I-
know if that's good enough.
I would think, yeah, for
Okay.
me it is,
We get
So I think in business session, are we all agreed here that we would like to send a letter in favor of this?
Yes.
Is everybody? Okay, Charles, you still have your hand up. Do you have a question about this process?
Oh, no, I was just agreeing. Yes, I'm in favor for letter. Sorry. I
Okay,
pressed the
then
wrong
we-
button. I was trying to unmute.
That we're all in favor of this, our questions have been answered, and we're noticing that this transfer is taking place.
Beautiful. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you so much for being
Yeah.
here. We really appreciate it, and again, we invite you at any time to reach out on any issue whatsoever.
Thank you.
Good, bad, or ugly,
Thank you
seriously.
so much. And I'm happy to repeat myself because I said when some of you were here communicating with Zona on the emails, we're blessed to have such a great community board with communications back and forth. You don't usually see it with government offices, if I may say, or other community boards. And I greatly appreciate it. I want to give you a shout out for that. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Okay.
Yehuda, I wouldn't leave these cookies here. They're probably gonna go to waste.
Before Passover.
Comments here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess we'll look out for the emails.
Thank you, Zona.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have Anna Champney. She's the Vice President for Research of the Citizens Budget Committee, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit civic organization. And their mission is to achieve constructive change in the finances and services of New York City and New York State government. Anna's going to be speaking to us about their recent resident survey, which I think is really interesting. And also FY 25 budget. Both of those things are going to be really super useful to us. You guys know this, we do this every year. All of the budget things that are going to impact the district for our upcoming budget requests and other issues within the district. Both of these reports were shared with you, but I want to hand it over to Anna to really get into it. Anna, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I have some slides, so I will put those up and talk through. I was going to start with the budget, save the survey for later, but we can, once we do that, we can stop and have questions, or if something is unclear, feel free to raise your hand or ask me. Just jump in. Okay. It's my deck. All right, you should see the presentation now.
Yes?
Okay, great. All right. So as Renee said, CBC is a nonprofit. We are in our 92nd year. Our offices are actually down on 35th, just by Penn Station. So in the community board. We are focused on policies and budget of both New York City, New York State, and the MTA. So we've been working on all of them. I'm happy to talk about our talk about the city budget first, and then this resident survey that we're very excited to have released just a few weeks ago. It's the second time we've done it, and it has some really interesting information. So let me get going. All right. So starting with the budget. So it's $113 billion. We actually, if you Sorry, I'm just shrinking the screen. We include a prior year payment, so our number for the total budget is a little bit higher than what is reported because the city will prepay some expenses this year for fiscal year 25 if they have a surplus. And so, but those are really fiscal year 25 expenses, so we think it's important to include them. If you paid your rent in December instead of January, it's not like you're not paying it, you just paid it early. So this is how spending in the preliminary budget breaks down. About half of the city spending is on salaries, wages, fringe benefits, and pensions for city employees. Those are the sections in blue. Debt service, which is the cost of principal and interest on the bonds that support the capital program, is about 8.2 billion, 7%. Medicaid, which is required by the state that the city have a local share, is 6%. And then you have this very large green segment that's a little over a third called other OTPS, that stands for other than personal service. This includes things like heat, light, and power, supplies. It also includes contractual services. So all of the services, social services that the city provides through nonprofits that it contracts with would be in other OTPS. And those nonprofits employees are not considered city employees, so they're not in the blue section of the pie. And then reserves, the purple slice is, these are what we would call in budgetary reserves or contingency reserves. This is money that will get spent down over the course of the year, but it's at this point doesn't have an assigned expenditure, and it's there in case there are expenses that arise. So taxes are 2/3 of the city's revenue. That's the dark blue bar. Within that, property tax is usually a little bit less than half, followed by income tax, which is the second largest. And then you have sales tax and the business taxes, but the city does have a very diverse tax base. The light blue is miscellaneous, so these are the fees and fines. We see state revenue is almost $19 billion next year. I used to say this was almost all for education. Education is by far the largest section of state aid, but state aid has gone up in the last couple of years as the state has contributed more towards the city's asylum seeker costs. The federal government is here at nearly 8 billion. This has gone down in recent years, and we'll see that in another chart. The COVID funds that we got were one time, and so those are being spent down. And then here you see those prior year resources, the 3.8 billion that were paid or will be paid in 24 for 25 expenses. So the other thing that might be of interest is the change. So the city did update its economic forecast and revenue forecast in January, and so there was an increase in tax revenues. It was 1.3 billion increase in 24, 1.6 in fiscal year 25.
Anna, can I ask
so
you to hold on one second?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, sorry, we just had something that was covering up the last column. 1 second. We're
Oh,
we're
no
moving.
worries.
Okay, now we're good. We're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank
So the property tax is up a little bit in fiscal year 25. This is based on the tax roll that the city released, but most of the upside is on the personal income tax and the business taxes. These are particularly hard to forecast and very much a function of the economy, Wall Street, employment. So they are, updating the economy, recognizing the lower risk of a recession and other positive economic trends that mean the city will likely have more revenue. At the end, I will talk about the city council response that came out just yesterday, and you might be thinking about. So spending did grow significantly.
Before you advance, can I jump in?
Yeah.
Can you just comment on the significant increases in the property and personal income tax?
Well, so I mean, the property tax here is a function of the tax roll. So the Department of Finance assesses all the property every year.
So what are the change? What's the drivers for that increase? The rate or the?
It's not a rate. The city keeps its overall rate the same. This increase is, well, there are two things. One is the city had already assumed that there would be an increase in the property tax. So this is not the year-over-year change. This is the change in fiscal year 25 from their November forecast to their January forecast. What is going to increase property tax revenues year over year are, falls into a few buckets. One is increases in market value. So class 1, 2, 3 family homes, many of them did see a decrease in property values. A lot of commercial values were flat, some went up. Larger rental buildings and other cooperative and condo values did increase. So that would be a driver of higher tax revenue. Another piece is physical improvements. So if there is new construction or new property that is coming on the tax roll. And then we also have exemptions. So, if a parcel has a 421A exemption or some other exemption that might be coming off, you would then see an increase in taxable assessed value. So it's a combination of those factors. The growth year over year is actually much slower than it had been before the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, property tax revenue year over year grew about 6% a year. Right now, we're closer to 1 to 2%. And there's a lot of uncertainty about the commercial real estate market. Personal income taxes. So now I'm wishing I had a trend chart to show you the specifics. Personal income tax revenue and business tax revenue were very high in 21 and 22, largely because Wall Street was doing really, really well. So despite the pandemic, despite remote work, the city had record levels of personal income and business taxes. 24 actually is a little bit of a slowdown. So this growth isn't particularly, it still keeps these taxes below those, sort of the forecast below those record levels at the beginning of the pandemic. But in terms of personal income tax, it's going to be a function of wages, jobs, and capital gains. So, the assumption or what might be driving fiscal 25 increase is that if we have a stronger forecast for Wall Street, the lower risk of recession, that might increase capital gains, which are volatile from year to year. And similarly for business taxes. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a historical piece, and this will help explain. So this is looking at spending first in all funds. So all funds means we're including city, state, federal, all of the spending. So you can kind of see pre-pandemic there was significant growth. You then have a little bit of a slowdown from 20 to 21. In 21 there were quite a few. In 20 services we didn't need to provide because of the shutdown. And then you see sort of pretty rapid increase in 22 and 23. Some of this is a function of, and into 24, where we're going from less than 121 to 115 in 24. A lot of this is the federal COVID aid, the one-time money. And that's why you then see fiscal year 25 in total coming down. If you look at it on a city fund, so this is just taxes and fees, you can kind of see that there was also a slowdown in 21, but then a big jump in 22 to 73 billion, another big jump in 23 to almost 81. So these are some of those big jumps from the tax revenues, relatively flat into 24, but then starting to grow again at a slower pace, but we still have growth. I think it's just important to recognize that even though we went through the pandemic and there was fear of a recession and a lot of households and individuals suffered greatly, the city economically and fiscally did get through this pretty well and was able to continue to provide services, saw revenue growth, increased its spending. And also when we talk about the reductions and the spending reductions, which are reflected in here, important to note that, the pegs and the spending cuts the Adams administration have implemented has been on a base that was growing pretty rapidly. And so these are the PEG savings. So in the November 23 plan, so if you remember back in September, the mayor's Adams administration issued a letter and they said they would require 3 rounds of PEGS programs to eliminate the gap from the agencies of 5% each. One in the November plan, one in the preliminary budget, one in the executive budget. So in November, they came pretty close to their target. The savings were roughly, 1.6 to $1.8 billion a year across all of the agencies. The preliminary budget savings were a little bit lower, especially in the out years. They chose to exempt some agencies like the police department from the second round. And they also, as well as some others, they have since then restored some of the cuts from November, and they have also said that they will not do the PEG in the executive budget. We are still concerned that the city does have long-term structural imbalance and that fiscal discipline and, closely examining your agency and your services for efficiency is important. And so one other way to look at these reductions, and we did this, so we have a book that gives you all of the cuts, and it's not a lot of information, but what we do based on it is determine whether we think the reduction or the savings is affecting a program, which is the dark orange, if it's achieving efficiency, which for us means recurring savings without reducing what service you're providing. Light blue is underspending and reestimate. So this is when a program costs less or you're able to spend less, but you're not actually making some improvement. Funding shifts means that you're shifting either to the federal or state government. You're trying to find alternative funding so that you don't need to spend city tax dollars. Vacancy reduction. So the city has been eliminating a lot of vacant positions in many agencies. You can have debt service savings if you can refund your debt or issue less than you planned. Or the green is revenue. You could, generate additional city revenue. So we go through and we categorize each one of the initiatives in one of these buckets. And our analysis showed that in November, about 17% of the reduction was going to affect programs. And the remaining 83% was either by making things run better, by recognizing that you don't need to spend as much, or by shifting onto federal state government, or by eliminating vacant positions, which didn't have any employees. In January, they lowered the percent that went to program reduction. It was only 5%, a bit of an increase in the amount that was being achieved through efficiencies. And again, a lot of re-estimates and funding shifts. So our point on this has been, there was significant reductions. It was almost $6 billion over the first 2 years. But most of that wasn't intended to or did not really hit programs and direct services being provided. And the city was doing what they could to trim spending elsewhere. I do want to take a moment on the asylum seeker spending. Don't have to talk through all of these numbers, and I will share the slide deck afterwards. The top segment gives you what the city was projecting they would spend to provide services to asylum seekers in November of 2023. And then one part of the PEG in the preliminary budget that wasn't in that prior slide was that there was a 20% reduction in city-funded spending on asylum seekers. So you can see that we went from planning to spend almost $3.6 billion in fiscal year 24 down to 2.3. And instead of planning to spend 5.5 in 25, we're now down to 3.6 billion. They also, you can see the state funds went up. So in the budget they released in January, the city assumed that the state would increase their contribution by $750 million in each of these fiscal years. That is close, but not quite what the governor put in her budget, which hasn't been enacted yet. So this is an uncertainty about how much state money there will be, but it was within a couple $100 million. And we see as the Adams administration has said, the federal funds number is very small. They're contributing a very small part of the total cost. But now you can kind of see the net decrease, both the decrease in city funding and also some of the offset by having additional state funding. What I will say is that this may actually still be higher than what the city ultimately needs to spend to provide services. These are estimates from some of the other fiscal monitors, the city and state comptroller, the independent budget office, who all think that spending this year and next year could be significantly lower. The mayor did say that there will be an additional 10% cut in the executive budget. So that should be about another, 500-600 million across the 2 years. So there's another sort of, this I think might be of particular interest. In the executive budget, there was 2.5 billion added in fiscal year 24 spending. So here we are, basically we were in the middle of the fiscal year and we said we need $2.5 billion more to fund programs that we're running at the moment. We break these up into fiscal cliffs, city funded fiscal cliffs. So that was 1.4 billion. These are programs like the FEPS housing vouchers, public assistance grants that were under budgeted. So we needed to increase the budget to match current needs and also to match prior years. So it's not like these are unexpected increases. Most of the fiscal monitors have been saying we have fiscal cliffs and we are under budgeting critical programs for a while now. There's also just chronic under budgeting of areas like overtime and MTA subsidies. That's almost another 700 million of the 2.5. And some new funding for new programs, but only 1 year at a time. And think about it, if you're running a business and you're going to hire an employee, you don't budget them for 1 year because you can't really pretend that they're going to just go away at the end of the year. So that creates additional cliffs. The thing I will note is this increase of 2.5 billion is in 24 only. These programs and this level of funding is not in the budget for fiscal year 25. Sorry, there's some recurring. And so when we went through in detail and looked at fiscal year 25, our estimate is that we're about $3.6 billion short in the preliminary budget to maintain service levels, not to increase programs, not to fund the voucher expansion that the city council passed, just to keep funding levels at this year's or in historical levels. Still, the city funded fiscal cliffs would probably need at least another 700 million for the existing FEPS voucher program, money for childcare, for housing for individuals with AIDS and HIV, for school nurses. So there are a lot of critical programs that aren't fully funded in the budget, and that is a concern in terms of transparency and being able to make choices about what you spend your resources on. Similarly, federal funding is running out from COVID. This is mainly affecting the DOE, which had significant federal money, but there have been reductions or would be reductions in spending on community schools, pre-K and 3K as these funds run out, and continued under budgeting. So we do have budget gaps. Fiscal year 25 does not. We're in balance on paper, but we still have budget gaps of 5 to 6 billion for the out years. If you add our estimates of the city funded fiscal cliff, the federal fiscal cliff, and the under budgeting, we're really 3.6 billion short for 25, and our out year gaps are closer to 9 to almost $10 billion. And this is sort of why we are concerned that, we should continue with the PEG. We should continue with efforts to sort of align recurring spending with recurring revenues. The city council response came out yesterday, so I do want to go over it quickly. They identified 6.15 billion in resources. 3.3 of that, this is over fiscal years 24 and 25. 3.4 billion is higher. Their forecast for tax revenues is higher than the City Office of Management and Budget. They identified the potential for 2.25 billion in underspending because there are a lot of vacant positions that they feel are unlikely to be filled. And that they are suggesting we reduce our in-year budgetary reserves, that 1.5 billion by 550 million. Sorry, that should be an M there. And then what they're proposing to do with these resources is about 1.6 billion is for council priorities and restoration of certain PEGs. They are saying we need to take $3 billion and set it aside for that fiscal cliff. So we said the fiscal cliff was 3.6 billion. The city and state comptroller numbers were a little bit lower, but there is this consensus among the monitors that the council is now acknowledging that we have under budgeting in our budget that we should be addressing. They are saying we should plan to make a deposit to the rainy day fund, so we start building that up for the future, which is a very good policy. And they actually leave themselves with about $1 billion that they don't attribute to or allocate to any particular spending at the moment. So this is what I had on the budget. I'm happy to stop here and take any questions or
Okay. This is a lot. All right. I'm looking right at Joe, because I know he's going to be our first up. Go ahead, Joe.
On one of the early slides where you analyzed the budget, you showed $10 billion in pension payments budgeted for, I think it was 24.
Mhm. Yeah.
I assume it, since it's budget, you're saying cash basis, right? Do you know if any of that, where's the pension? 10 billion.
Yeah.
Mhm. Do you know if any of that is to cover the unfunded pension, or whether that is the amount that they intend to pay, write a check for?
This is not driven by the payments themselves. This is the actuarially required contribution, which is both the
minimum,
current
the
year
minimum.
actuarial cost plus filling the unfunded. So the city started, I think, back in 2013. They decided that they would fully fund the pensions, and they spread out those additional payments over 20 years. So every year for the last 10 years, they're contributing what the actuary says they need to, as well as some additional funding to catch up.
Right, and I apologize. I did not mean to say pension. I should have said other post-employment benefits.
Oh.
My
Sorry.
mistake.
No, okay, so OPEB, no, they are not pre-funding anything for the OPEB. That is in the fringe benefits line. Retiree health benefits on a pay-go basis are between $2.5 and $3 billion. So that is what the expense is. The city does have its retirement health benefits trust, which is supposed to accumulate resources against the OPEB liability. The liability is in the order, this one fluctuates from year to year based on assumptions, but usually around 100 billion, 105 billion. There is roughly $5 billion in that fund right now, but they have not made a voluntary deposit in a couple of years now.
So they're 5% funded. And the pension is like 76% funded, if I'm not mistaken, 80% maybe. Depends on the market, I guess, but.
Yeah, it depends on the market. When we had that really great year, we actually almost hit 100, and then we had a really bad year and everything came down. But yeah, and they're in the 70 to 80%. It varies across the 5 funds.
Okay.
Some of them are better funded than others.
So I know your
fire
nonprofit.
fund, I think, is particularly.
I know your nonprofit's mission is mostly on the. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Is mostly on the budget, but in your opinion, what are your thoughts about the solvency of New York City? Is New York City solvent?
Yes. I mean, we are not at this point, yes, it's telling me my internet connection is unstable.
We can hear you though. It's fine.
Okay, that's good. That's good. So apologies if there is an issue. Yes, if you look at all total long-term liabilities, they are significant. They exceed assets. OPEB is a major concern. I think we do, the challenge is, and I think the reality is the city does have time to address the retirement health benefits. And try to figure out how to make those affordable, as well as to set aside the money. It is a really difficult challenge to think about how do we set aside $100 billion now. Our recommendation has been that this needs to be a combination of both sort of shrinking the benefits, reducing the benefits, and funding them. And the city was trying to do this, at least with the Medicare Advantage, which is still in litigation. One of the benefits of Medicare Advantage and switching to that would have been that it would have reduced that OPEB liability because you wouldn't be paying the Medicare supplemental policy costs for retirees. We don't know if that will go through. But the reality is that the majority of that OPEB liability is not from retirees on Medicare. A lot of it is from pre-Medicare retirees who are still receiving full benefits through the city's, usually through GHI, where the family premium is to $25,000 to $30,000 a year. And so that is really a large part of the OPEB cost. I think many municipalities across the country have scaled some of those benefits back. They've had premium sharing. So I think some of those may at some point have to be on the table for the city.
Thank you very much.
Tristan.
So with regard to the 100 billion projected liabilities, if it's like not addressed, is there some year where projections say it's going to dramatically like increase in the future? Or is it just kind of spread out, or we just know at some point we'll have to pay 100 billion?
Well, I mean, the 100 billion is the net present value today. So what you would need to set aside today, assuming certain assumptions about interest rates, costing, et cetera, to be able to have enough to pay the benefits for that have been earned to date.
Gotcha.
But that's not an actuary, but that is the challenge. That's sort of like what you would need to have in order to be able to fund it. The other thing that's important to know on the OPEB is that the Retiree Health Benefits Trust is not like a pension fund. Those $5 billion are not invested in stocks and bonds and in a diversified portfolio that earns 5, 6, 7% in a good year or over 10 years on average. They're pretty much kept liquid, which meant for much of, the 2010s and into the 2020s, interest rates were low and they were not earning significant interest. And that's a missed opportunity too. If you've got why have $5 billion sitting basically in a bank account earning 1%, if that much. I'm sure they're doing more than that, but I think that's another opportunity that if you have a clear funding mechanism and you're making those deposits, you're also trying to use that to grow your money over time so that, you have that benefit as well.
Is that unique to New York and how we're managing that 5 billion, or no?
No, to be honest, OPEB is unfunded in many states, many localities.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that the ones that do fund it or fund it fully are particularly rare. I'm not as well versed on exactly how they manage those funds and who has the fund set up. The state, for example, still, I think last year in the state budget, they may have created a retiree health benefits trust for the state, but they haven't made deposits yet. So the state's OPEB liability is fully unfunded for all state and local government employees outside of New York City.
And the pension as well, pretty much lower funding percent for the state.
No, the state pension funds are pretty close to funded.
Okay.
They have a higher funding ratio than the city does. But the two funds are also structured differently.
Additional questions? Other questions?
Just give 2 online, I think. Marion.
Kevin, did you have a question?
I did, but you can go with the online first. I don't mind.
Oh, who's online? Let me see. Mary, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Anna. It's such a great presentation. I'm just curious, when you showed the slide that had the under budgeting and you had 666 for MTA, didn't Brad Lander just release a report that showed that the NYPD greatly is overspending on overtime and accounts for more than half of the overspending on overtime?
Yes, so part of the challenge is that, and this predates, COVID predates a long time. The city chronically underestimates how much overtime, especially overtime at the uniformed agencies, will be. The PD is the largest of the uniformed agencies. So while their overtime has been running close to, 6, 7, 800 million for the last few years, the budget is something like 400 million. And so, they do add money over the course of the year. This time they added I think this is about 400 million for overtime, 450 and a smaller piece for the MTA. There's also overtime at the fire department at this point. So, but these are areas, if you look at what we said for next year, our estimate is that the MTA subsidy is about 150 and that we need probably 650 more in the budget for uniformed overtime based on historical use. I think the other piece we would love to see is better management of overtime, to the extent that, some of this is not mission critical. Each one of these uniformed agencies is a little different in what drives its uniformed overtime rates and things like that. But the city has had very limited success in sort of reducing the growth and the number of hours.
Yeah, could I just ask a follow-up question, Renee?
Sure.
So it's not on this presentation, but I obviously noticed the NYPD glaringly not on your breakdown here. Today you released a report, correct, about fare evasion? Yeah, if you're talking about mission driven, NYPD last year spent $150 million on fare evasion, and the estimated value of the people beating the fares was only $104,000. So I'm just questioning, you guys are such great fiscal monitors, that just doesn't seem 150 million investment to capture $104,000 in fare beaters. But you released a report today saying that they need to double down on that.
Well, so what we supported were a series of policy interventions that Governor Hochul has that we think will help drive down fare evasion. And it's not just about, putting cops in the subway stations and buses. Part of it is about deterring fare evasion, and part of it is about, making it harder. Part of it is about increasing the penalties. There is fare evasion that is for folks who are really economically stressed and can't afford the fares. But, if we all ride the subway, there are also people who are just jumping the turnstile because they can. And the reality is the MTA needs those resources to run that system. And if those people aren't paying, other people will. We will have to raise fares or raise taxes or raise subsidies or in some other way fill the gap. So from our point of view, you want to achieve ways that you reduce fare evasion, both through enforcement, but also through deterrence. And, there are, so I think that's, our point of view from the MTA there. We also talked about license plate fraud a lot, which is a growing concern, that people just obstruct their license plates and then you can't collect their tolls across the bridges. But I think our main point is that non-payment affects the transit system and it affects the cost that others will have to bear.
Mary, do you have?
No, I think it speaks for itself. I mean, I think there's a better way to go about this, that if we're serious about, bringing down the police overtime, spending $150 million on fare evasion is not exactly the best, I don't believe, investment of police resources. And I would hope going forward that the Citizens Budget Commission would be a little more transparent and list the NYPD overtime alongside the MTA overtime. They're both huge problems.
I mean, these numbers are not about the MTA overtime. This is two separate pieces. Overtime at New York City agencies, including the police department, the fire department, the sanitation department, and an MTA subsidy that the city has to pay to the MTA. under state law, they have to contribute for paratransit and other things that they don't budget. So maybe it's a little bit, maybe my error here is that I combined a couple different things. But we have very much said that the city needs to control overtime, and we haven't come out, and our report wasn't saying that the right solution to overtime is about, flooding the system with police officers. But there are other policies and proposals in the governor's state budget that we do think would be helpful in curbing fare evasion.
Kevin, can we get to your question now?
Sure. I just had a couple quick ones. On one, the immigrant spending. This year, the projected spending was way down, and then the next 2 years was up slightly. Could you just talk a little bit about what the dynamic is going on there?
You mean the 4.2 that we're currently projecting for 24?
Yeah, I guess the original spending was expected to be higher, and then the next couple of years was expected to be lower. I'm just curious why.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of things. I mean, the city is implementing some policies with regards to how long individuals can stay in shelter, et cetera, that they are hoping will reduce their total cost. And I think they're also trying to find some savings on the other services that they're providing. Fiscal year 25 is higher than 24 because I think the forecast still assumes an increase in the number of individuals and household and families being served. The numbers in 26 and 27, the 2.5 and 1.5 billion, I don't know that those are based on a very, on a mathematical model as much as they are a recognition that, the asylum seeker cost won't just suddenly disappear in one day, but I think they're hoping that it would decrease over time and that they will, reflect a more accurate number. What I can say is both of the comptrollers, the city and state comptroller in their report, estimated that the costs in 26 and 27 will probably be $1 billion to $1.5 billion higher than what the city right now has in the budget. But it is very difficult at this point to figure out what the trajectory of these costs will be. So we haven't focused so much on the out years, but there definitely is a risk that, there will be additional funding or additional costs, and also uncertainty about what the state will continue to do. We know what the state has proposed to do through 25, but not in 26 and 27.
That's fair. And then just one follow-up question. Several times during your presentation, you referenced the fiscal cliff. And I know that that particular term was used in terms of the federal budget years ago in terms of tax cuts and several things that were sort of, precipitous that were coming about. Are you using that term because there's something specific that's going to come about? Or is that just sort of a broad-based term to reference the budget deficits that we're facing?
We started using the term in this particular instance back in May of 21 when we looked at what the city was planning to do with the COVID money that was coming. So the city was getting this significant increase in both education and sort of generally flexible state and local recovery funds from the federal government. Mayor de Blasio put in the first budget that he had what he proposed to do and how he proposed to spend these billions of dollars. We did an analysis, and our concern then was that the city's plan was to fund recurring programs and to, over a period of 3 to 4 years with non-recurring revenue, and then have no money after that. And so we said the title was Federal Aid Now, Fiscal Cliffs Later. And what we were portending or pointing to was that if you fund with the non-recurring revenue, once it runs out, you then have a cliff or a shortfall. And so we have since then talked about both the city funded fiscal cliff and the federal fiscal cliff. The city funded one being when the city knowingly funds recurring programs only 1 year at a time. You know, the FEPS voucher program is a great example. It is going to cost the city more than $800 million this year for the current voucher holders and the vouchers that are on the street being shopped. Next year's budget has $150 million. So, and no one thinks that we're suddenly going to take everyone's voucher back. At some point, we're going to come up with that money. So from our point of view, it's not transparent and it's not fully reflecting the fiscal condition of the city if you're pretending that your $800 million program is only going to cost you $150 million next year. So our push has been, let's put that money in so that we know exactly what all of our obligations are to maintain services, and then we can make the choices. So without the information and the transparency, the public, the elected officials aren't the ones making the choices about what we fund and what we don't fund.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Charles,
Oh, sorry.
I have one more question, if you don't mind, and I know that you're anxious to get to the other report, but Charles, your hand, and then I see Mary, just very quickly.
Yes, hi. So is it true that the public parks get 1% or like very little of the budget, and why do you think that is? Because surely it's important for New Yorkers to enjoy, you know, the rec centers and things like that have very good programming. Also, I'm concerned about cuts to libraries again, and you know, libraries are not just places to read. You know, there's where you can learn how to set up a business or career resources, or such as the Library for the Blind, Talking Book and Braille Library. So, you know, is there any way to protect some of these services and maybe consider them as vital services?
Yeah, so on parks, the operating budget is less than 1%. That the operating budget doesn't include some of those central costs like pension and fringe benefits. The libraries they were subject to the same 5% cut in the November mod or in the November plan. They were not subject to a peg in January. You know, I think there's a good likelihood that part of the negotiation with the council will restore their funding. So, you know, I think that's what I'm, in terms of, you know, but this would be our point, that you need to fully know what are all of the costs, what are all of our priorities. There is not an infinite amount of money. So if we want to increase spending for parks, where else do we not spend as much? And those are sort of the choices and the conversations that should be going on.
Right. Mike Kaybeck, you had a question.
Yes. Most of this budget stuff is way over my head, but I live in New York. 33 years ago, I bought a co-op, and every year I get a raise. And this past year, we had the biggest raise that we ever got, 13% in our maintenance. And I asked, why, what is it from? And they said it was mostly property tax. Now, I assume that's the one that you had 2024, 110, and then next year, 2025, it went 5 times as high to 534. Does that mean that I can anticipate another raise that makes 13% look like bupkis?
No, so what this chart is the change in the forecast for 24. So what this means is that the city, if the 534 means that the city now expects to collect 534 million more in fiscal year 25 than they originally forecast. The total amount of the property tax collected in the city is north of $32 billion. The increase is not, you know, I don't know what is driving the increase in any particular building. Overall, there wasn't a 13% increase in the average tax last year. But that is one of the challenges in the way the city administers its property tax, is that they keep the overall rate the same. And so if assessed value goes up, so how much we think your property is worth for tax purposes, your tax bill goes up. In other localities, they will sometimes lower or raise that rate, depending on how much revenue they need. in New York City, the sort of operating process or standard has been that if assessed values go up 6%, revenues go up 6%, and we have more money to spend. And that is in fact what happened during, the 10 years of following the Great Recession to COVID, is we had, property tax increases of 6% a year on the revenue side and comparable increases on average tax bills. And that is really compounded and made property taxes unaffordable to a lot of households. And that's also compounded by the fact that the system itself has a lot of inequities. So not everyone shares that increase in taxes equally. So, I wouldn't expect another 13% increase based on what we've seen in the property tax roll. But this is, an area where, there is a lot of opportunity and need for, real significant reform to have it be a fairer system.
Mike, do you have something?
So I just read it wrong. From 2024 to 25, that 110 up to 534 was not what would need to be collected. It was just another number. That had nothing to do with.
No,
I didn't understand it. Like I said.
I'm sorry. I should have explained it better. This is because the city increased their forecast. So this is where is the extra money that the city said they would be collecting coming from.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm just going to check if there are additional questions from anyone on the presentation. Anybody else? Anna, this is really great. I wonder if we can come back to you as we continue to do budget stuff. People on this committee can come back to you with more questions as it occurs to us, maybe throughout the year, if that's okay.
You're always welcome to email me or reach out to us, and me or the staff can, put together information for you.
That's great. Thank you so much. This is really helpful.
So the resident survey is really cool. CBC did this. This is the third time we're doing the survey for the second time. The city did it the first time in 2008. We use the same research firm, same protocol, very similar questionnaire. So we're able to do really sort of, it's a random sample. It's weighted. It's a large enough sample so we can have statistically valid comparisons with a relatively low margin of error citywide. And we can do comparisons over time. So this year we mailed about 125,000 surveys out to New Yorkers. We got a 5% response rate. This is low, but what is commonly happening in sort of mailed surveys across the board. But that meant 6,632 responses from New Yorkers. Across the city, our goal was at least 100 in every community board. Our margin of errors are pretty low citywide, plus or minus 1%, and then they get a little bit larger. So this is sort of how confident we are that our survey gets you the accurate or the actual result. I do want to say the context is important. So I'm going to go a little bit faster here, but we are coming out of COVID. We are coming out of a very difficult and trying time. Crime is still elevated above 2017 levels, and that affected how individuals responded. You may have seen some of this has gotten a fair amount of press coverage. 30% rated quality of life as excellent or good, down from 50%. New Yorkers feel better about their neighborhoods. 50% say it's excellent or good rather than the city as a whole. 37% rated public safety in their neighborhood as excellent or good, down from 50%. This was even more pronounced on the subways. Only 24% rated the quality of government services as excellent or good, so also very concerning. And maybe not surprising, only 11% believes government spends tax dollars wisely, down from 21% back in 2017. I'm going to skip over this slide. So these are some of the figures, and we did pull out Community Board 5 here. My colleague Adam did. So the lighter bar is 2008, 2017 in the middle, and then 2008, and see how much of a decrease. So citywide, 30% of New Yorkers say quality of life is good or excellent. That's 46% in your community district. And then we have it also, you can take a look by, and I will share this deck and our resources. So more satisfied. Another one here is looking at how we rate the city versus our neighborhood. So if you look at Manhattan Community Board 5, 46% said quality of life in the city was excellent or good. 62% said their neighborhood was a good or excellent place to live. So almost 2/3 of the respondents were happy with the living in the community board.
And how many
Mhm.
responded, how many respondents in CB5?
I don't know offhand. It's probably it's like 100. It's somewhere between 100 and 115. We can get the exact number. It's in the documentation. So the margin of error at the community board level is probably about 8 or 10%. So that means it's somewhere between 52% and 72%, if that's helpful. Given how small the sample is. And there is also information on Manhattan. There aren't maps, I think, are really useful. So you can see the maps. You can the blue shows you where we have like the highest satisfaction ratings in the city and for neighborhood and city overall. One thing that we've really drawn attention to in the pink circle is that there's this concentration of very low satisfaction, both with the city overall and their neighborhood in the South and Central Bronx. So that has sort of stood out as a finding. These are our public safety questions. So on the one side is the city as a whole over here, and these are just the community board 5. So you can see, park, do you feel safe in the park during the day? We had 71% said very safe or safe in the city, 82% in the community board. So your safety ratings or how safe your residents felt was modestly better than the city as a whole across the board. But here, even here on the subway at night, you're down to 26%. So I think that's been a big, folks are much less comfortable on the subways than they used to be. If you look back in 2017, 60% of residents in the community board felt safe on the subways at night. We have some questions about rating city government overall. So this is the citywide, where at 24% say it's excellent or good. This is the community board 5. This is one where you're actually less positive than the city overall. We also ask about spending tax dollars wisely. Again, modestly below, but probably when you're looking within the margin of error, but still very low satisfaction and down significantly from 2008. We asked a new question about how the city is doing addressing New Yorkers' housing needs this time. And the community board and the city, 10%. This is not an area where there was, a lot of folks thinking we were doing a good job. We also ask about a whole range of services, both in your city, in the city as a whole, and in your neighborhood. Here, we're kind of arraying them from those that folks are most positive with. So between 65 and 70% of New Yorkers say fire services and EMS are good or excellent, compared to only 5 to 10% saying traffic or homeless services are good or excellent, and a lot in between. We can sort of dive in both by race, ethnicity, and by income. So we could see that white non-Hispanics were more likely to be satisfied, had higher satisfaction with government services, and similarly higher income households had a higher satisfaction. This is that detail on the services. So question 4 is about services in your neighborhood. And here it's citywide, Manhattan is a borough, and then the community board. Blue is over 65%, green is 50 to 65, yellow is 35 to 50, and red is below 35. So red is the least satisfied, blue is the most, and you can kind of see in some cases there's consistency, but you can kind of see how does the community board rank to the borough or to the city as a whole, and what are the differences. Much more satisfaction about snow removal, for example, or even the availability of healthcare, parks and activities. And so this points to some of the strengths and what it is that is positive about the neighborhood and what respondents and residents were saying. We also ask here about these are services citywide, so less about the neighborhood. Generally more negative. And you can see these are places where the respondents from the community board felt significantly less positive than Manhattan or the city as a whole on things like public education or pre-K programs. No one is very positive about public housing services. So what I want to do quickly, because I know we're out of time, is and so all of this is up on our website. I think I have to stop sharing so I can share the website. Because my colleague Adam created a great interactive, he's actually watching, so a shout out to him, where you can go and look at the results. So these are maps of all of the community boards. You can pick the question that you want. You know, what do we think about recycling services? And you can get a map of all 3 years. You can hover over the community board and get the information. You can see how things have changed. So this one is by community board. So you can look at all of the questions, and then there is also graphically, you know, the questions by, you can do it by borough, household income or race ethnicity. Similarly, all of the services. So we could look at public education, which was something that was particularly low in the community board. And you can kind of, 3 years is sometimes hard to look. You can just make it 1 year. But this is Manhattan, you know, 7.5 say excellent, 30 say good. And then these are fair and poor, and how that compares to the citywide and the other boroughs. Actually, kind of, since I'm now curious, I don't know what the map says on, oh, this is public education. So you can kind of see the red is the lowest percent, rating it as excellent or good, and you can kind of see where those pockets are. There was virtually no red in 2017, so a real decrease over time too, which is another big part of the story. But I would urge, you know, you're welcome to reach out to us if you have specific questions, but it might be, you know, you can poke around here and find all sorts of really interesting data points and trends as you think about your community and stuff.
This is fantastic. What a fantastic tool, Anna. Thank you so much for sharing. That is really great. It's something I think we're definitely going to be digging into, particularly going forward for our budget. Tristan, I see you have a question. I see you, Charles.
Sorry.
I saw Tristan
Yeah,
first. but then we'll go
so
to you.
second that, I thought it was really cool. I was playing around with that interface that you were just showing. But really curious, I noticed that you're not able to filter the results by age of the respondent. Is that information that you gather and it's just not included in how you're able to play with it? Or do you have the functionality to like dig into that and how it might vary on your end?
We do. We ask a couple questions that could be interesting. I think we wanted to keep, you know, we could add to that. Adam can add to it very easily. We ask the age of the respondent who does the survey for the household, but we also ask if the household includes any children under 12, any children 12 to 17, or anyone over 65. So you can capture, even if the respondent isn't a child, well, it can't be a child, or a senior, whether or not that is a household that has, and I think there will probably be, we're still doing additional research and doing additional reports, and I think we'll sort of roll out more parts of this so that people can dig in over time. But age is a factor. We do have that data. We have data on educational attainment, employment status, a lot of other interesting stuff.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, again, super cool stuff.
Charles, your question.
Yes, and sorry, Tristan, for interrupting. I thought we were coming to a close. I wanted to quickly say that is there any way that if Adam doesn't mind, is there a way to make all this data into a non-visual format for people who are blind or visually impaired, who use screen readers, or you know, who want to find out the information, maybe a kind of like ChatGPT style kind of thing, where maybe they can type a question in a search and get the results like in text versus with the imagery. I don't know if that's a lot for Adam to do, but I thought at least I would ask if there's a way to make it more accessible to those who are blind and visually impaired. Thing.
Sure. So in addition to this interactive, our website has the reports that the survey vendor did, which are just tabular. So there are just tables of the question and the categories, and we've created other versions of that. So I mean, I'm not familiar with what ChatGPT or other sources would need, but it is out there in other formats. And we also, so I think that might work. The community board results it's over 100 pages, and it has a page for each question, and it gives the breakdown by a couple demographic categories. So, the detail is available in that form, and maybe that would work.
Just very quickly, sorry. If you guys were willing, if I did struggle with the website, is there a way I could contact you guys and maybe ask you guys if you could give me, or maybe, I don't know if someone from the committee could give me visual assistance if ever I needed to look something up. I wonder if there was.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can definitely, you can email me. I will share my email. Make sure it's on the front of the deck, and I'll send the deck to Renee so that she can share it. And you're welcome to reach out. And we can also send the website has the PDFs. So I don't know if that would be, it's just a standalone PDF of the results.
It'll work as long as it's an accessible PDF. I think there's a way to turn a PDF into an accessible format.
But yeah, if you reach out, Adam or I can help work with you to make it accessible and facilitate accessing the data.
All right, I just want to check one more time. Any more questions? Any more comments? And this was really both pieces, super interesting, going to be super helpful for all of us here in the committee. And I just want to thank you, and reserve the right for all of us to reach out. I'm sure we will be reaching out, and want to thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for staying. I ran over, sorry about that, but appreciate the time and all of the great questions, and love seeing people engaged and interested in learning about this. And so thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Have a good night. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Mike, for the dashboard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good night.
Okay. Good night.
Adam.
All right.
Adam.
So, now I'll turn to new business. If anybody has any items of new business. I know we had spoken before Nick left, we talked about task forces. So, things are a little bit in flux, as I guess we can all appreciate. So I'm just gonna put everything on hold, if everybody's cool with that. Because normally with task force, we start like at the committee, and then we ask everybody and their brother at the greater board, and we sometimes get people from off the board to join. I think right now, given the flux, we might hold off. We were looking at the mental health, unless anybody has any thoughts about that, Justin?
Oh, can we just keep going? Like, I don't think things are in flux. I think this BAU, I know we have a meeting tomorrow, but like, I don't know why we need to pause on this stuff. Like, we had a meeting a few weeks ago, we were talking about great ideas and mental health.
Do you want to continue with I guess we can. Are you interested in being
Yeah,
on the
well,
task force?
yeah.
I know that
I know
Mohit is.
Mohit was too. Like,
Is there anybody here who's interested in Mary, are you on the task force?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I'd like
Anybody
to
else?
join the task force too. Thank you.
Okay, so the way that we will do it, or the way we have done it before, I don't know how Samir will choose to do it, but the way that we used to do was we would take it to the chair, and then we would open it up to other people on the board. I would do the report, then we would ask who else on the greater board, and we would also ask if people in the greater community. So I guess I will follow that. I will check with the chair. I mean, things are in flux, because I don't know if that's the way it will go, but I will certainly ask. How about that? Any other business?
Yeah, new business.
Yes, go ahead.
There's a free tour
Is that new business, Mike? Come on,
on
okay.
Thursday of the Garment District. Now, certain people here have taken that tour and they didn't exactly hate it. And they actually loaned, am I right?
Yeah.
Joe, am I right, Renee?
I loved it.
And they didn't actually
Money back.
Oh.
double your money back for a free double. Oh, yeah. On Thursday at 10:30 at the big yellow button. Show up. I'll be there.
Okay.
New
All right.
business.
Can we get a preview of tomorrow's agenda?
No.
Okay.
Tomorrow.
And, any other business? Move to adjourn? Okay, good night, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.